Hi guys, it's Matt Ginger here, and this is my theology expert project. The project that I was assigned to do was to build a church in Minecraft, um, and the details in this project are why are things placed in a church how they are, and what's the significance behind them. So without any further introduction, I'm just gonna get right into it. Okay, so this is the church that I built. It is a medieval or it is a medieval styled church. Um, that is why it is made out of stone, and some of that wood in the roofing. Um, yeah, um, we got some of the flying buttresses on the sides and on the back. There's not a whole lot stuff to do on the exterior. Um, because there isn't really that much of significance to the exterior. As you see right here, there is a graveyard. Um, from pictures that I've seen of medieval churches, they do actually have a smaller type of graveyard, or that's what I usually just think of when I think of a medieval church. There is a graveyard. Um, so nothing really special about this. It's just a decoration piece that I thought would be cool to add in. Um, that's pretty much it for this area. Another thing that I thought would have been cool to add in was this bell tower with an actual bell. Um, Not really anything special here, just a bell. Um, yeah. So now we're gonna move on into the interior, and I apologize if anyone gets motion sick. So we're at the front of the church now. Um, so yeah, let's just go in. The very first thing you see when you come in here is the baptismal font. Um, Now, the baptismal font isn't supposed to be overly huge because it's not the main drawing point um, to the church. I mainly put the baptismal font here because um, in most churches, um, that's where they are. But also, I feel like this will, when it's here, it prepares you for the mass because you're getting in that um, prayerful mindset, and so that way you can be more be open to listening to the mass. Um, and now the next thing that we're gonna go over is where the choir sits. Um, Now the reason why it's back here is because in most of the older churches, it is in the back because they're basically trying to force you to sing. Like, that's not what they're actually trying to do, but it seems like they're forcing you to sing. Um, it also has to be visible to the assembly. Um, Pretty much is, uh, especially with mothers because they have eyes in the back of their head. Um, but yeah, usually in churches now, you usually see the choir like to the side or behind the altar or sanctuary. Um, and now another thing that a church is supposed to have is a narthex. I don't really have a narthex, technically. And what the narthex is supposed to do is that it's supposed to be a gathering area, um, in a buffer zone. And a buffer zone for the transition from everyday life to a time with God. Um, and I guess that's kind of where the baptismal font is. It's basically in the narthex. Um, and so now we're gonna go to the congregational area, and now part of the requirements is that they must be able to kneel down, um, and it has to be accommodated for people such as the handicapped, and that is why the back four pews here are shorter than the front four. And another thing, the congregational area can't be too far away from the sanctuary lighting. Um, I think I did that really well. It also can't be super close. But yeah, the next thing that we are going to cover is the sanctuary. Now, the key things in the sanctuary are obviously the altar, the priest's chair, and the ambo. We're gonna first cover the ambo. The ambo, if you didn't know already, is that big podium on the altar where they say the first and second readings, the responsorial psalm, and the gospel readings. Part of the ambo is that it has to show dignity to the saving word. I think that it does, since the saving word is so dignified that I just made it simple. I don't think this should be over elaborate than the actual word. And it has to be prominent, and that is why it is brought forward from everything else, and that is why it stands out a little bit more than everything else on the altar. Sanctuary. And now we're going to move on to the priest's chair. There aren't a whole lot of requirements for where the priest sits, only that it has to show his power over the assembly, showing that he is in the person of Jesus and God. And now not the last thing, well, one of the last things of the sanctuary is the altar. It has part of the altar is that it has to show nobility and strength. That is why I used cobblestone. And another reason why I chose to use cobblestone was because with the resources that I had used, it says that the altar must reflect Christ as the living stone, which is why I had used stone here, because Christ is the living stone. And another thing, it can't be very tall, because if it is very tall, there's a symbolic separation of the assembly. And so now now we're gonna move on to the tabernacle. Now the tabernacle is usually located behind and to the side of the altar. It's just usually it's not usually, but right directly behind the altar. But this is the only place where I saw it fitting. It cannot be on the altar. It cannot be. It must be in the sanctuary, which it is, and it has to be an acceptable distance away from the altar, and I would consider this to be acceptable, quote unquote. Now, I feel like the tabernacle should signify that it is special, in which it is because it's housing the consecrated hosts for the Mass, or like the unconsecrated hosts for the Mass. Um, and I just feel like that if it's not represented properly, that people are just gonna be like, it's just a little structure in the church, which it's not. It's very special to Christians and other Catholics. And that is another reason why I did it the way I did, because I had used in this, like, I used a precious metal, which is that gold block you see, and I used iron, and I used some more cobblestone to reflect Christ as the living stone. And to top it all off, I just added this very elaborate piece of decoration. Um, yeah. So one final thing about the sanctuary as a whole, it has to be elevated, um, because it's very important. Uh, it's very important to how the Mass is. Um, so, the last thing that I'm going to cover in depth is the crucifix. Now, the crucifix has to be near the altar. Well, there's one check. It has to be dignified, that brings the presence of Christ to the assembly. Well, I think it does. Um, so both of those are checked. Um, that is all that my resources really described for the crucifix. But now we're going to get into some of the more extra stuff. So back here is where all the hosts for Mass will get prepared, and where the priest will get ready for Mass, puts on his robes and stuff. And that's all this area is. And then what these here are, they're books that describe what each color and what each color is for, like during the liturgical season, and which these are liturgical colors, and they all have a specific meaning. I'm not going to get into that because of that could have been someone else's project, or it is someone's project. But yeah, now time to get to the very last room in my church. Now, as you may be thinking, well, what is it? Um, well, in older churches, um, they may or may not have a crypt, and that is what I did. And what the crypt usually is, it's a place where priests or whoever are buried when they die. That's mainly in the Vatican and Rome. Um, there's a crypt for all the popes that have died. I just thought it would be cool if I added this in. There's not really a whole lot. I didn't really look into this that much, but I just thought it would be cool to have it in here. I actually have to give credit because one of my friends said, "Hey, you should do this." I'm like, "Okay, I'll do it." But yeah, that is all I have for the specific details about a church. And then as to sum it all up, and then like the church as a whole has some requirements that needs to be explained. And so part of the congregational area is that it has to be a valid place of worship. And what the congregational area means, it's just this whole area. It has to be has to be like prayerful, basically. It can't be distracting, um, or secular. And then the church as a whole, it has to be a proper place of worship, much like the congregation area. Um, it can't be over elaborate, like I said. It can't be too distracting. Um, it like the design in the church, like it needs design, obviously, but it has to be worship centered. And then the very last and probably the most important thing about a church is that it has to be able to house religious events, much like Easter Vigil and Masses, confirmation, stuff like that. Um, and that is all I have for my expert project. I really hope that you guys grasped some new information from this, and I hope you learned something that you didn't know before, or if you're confused on a few things, I hope those cobwebs got cleared up, and if you had any questions, I really hope that I answered them. Um, but yeah, um, a few final notes that I would like to say. Um, the resources that I used were given to me by Mr. Barth, and he had found it. Um, and the document that I used um, is the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, built of living stones, architecture, and worship, with adaptations for the arch. That's not important. Never mind. I'm not gonna. That's not important. um, I'd also like to thank Mr. Barth for allowing me to do this for my expert project. Um, and I'm actually very grateful that he suggested it. So thank you, Mr. Barth, for allowing me to do this. Um, Thank you for all of you who are watching this video. Um, and yeah, that is all I have for you today. Bye.